Good evening, day walkers and night stalkers. It's me, your twisted southern horror queen, coming to you live from under a full moon right here in southeastern Louisiana. Glad to have all you folks jumping on board tonight. It's going to be a hell of a ride, as usual. You already knew that. You wouldn't be here, right? There's my girl Susie in the house. Hey, author Paula Harden just jumped on board too. Good to see you, my girl, my twisted sister in Pearl River County, Mississippi. So glad to have all y'all here tonight, chilling with me. Hey, David, what's happening, my man? We got all kind of crazy stuff we're talking about. Gavin already knew that because that's why he's here. That's my friend from way up north across the border. He knows what cold winters are all about over there. He also knows about the Wendigo too, right, Gavin? That's one hell of a little crew. We talked about him a while back, but I think Gavin was actually having to work that weekend, or that week, so he didn't get to catch the show live, but I know he went back and watched it later. Thanks for that, Gavin. I appreciate it. All right, so before we get everything rolling, y'all know I like to do all my shout-outs, but before I even do the shout-outs, guess what? Fury is now available. That's right, folks. Volume 2 of the Adrian Trilogy series has gone live, and it is out there corrupting the masses. If you haven't been corrupted yet, it's about that time, don't you think? And if you've read the original, or not Volume 2, but the second edition of any of the Adrian Trilogy books, please go to Amazon.com and write some reviews for me there. These are new, so I don't have all of my reviews up there anymore. Hey, Freddie, I'm sorry my comments aren't feeding, so I'm going to have to keep looking back and going back to the screen just to say, hey, what's going on? There's my girl, Wayla. She's from Washington Parish, Louisiana. We got them jumping on board from all over the freaking planet tonight. I love it like that. Like I said, corrupting the masses. Okay, folks, so let me give my shout-outs to the Adrian's Fury Dragster sponsors real quick. Here is a big, wet, creepy chick kiss coming at you. Renegade Racing Fuels, Surreal Studios, D&M Graphics, Amelie Oil, Jesus, Canon Filters. There's just a laundry freaking list, and there will be a new one coming up here real soon, I'm pretty sure. We'll have to let Big Johnny Blender talk about that on Whiskey, Cars, and Cigars tomorrow night at 7 Central and 8 Eastern. Also, got to give my shout out to those demented little kiddos over there at the lineup. We love those guys, and they have been busting ass, digging around in all these creepy places and brushing off the cobwebs just to find us all kinds of crazy horror trinkets and collectibles for the next Creepy Crate shipment, which is coming up here real soon. So if you guys haven't signed up for that, oh my God, this is one that you are not going to want to miss. I had a little devil come and sit on my shoulder and tell me what's going to be in this next crate. Really, guys, get signed up. I told you, the guys over at the lineup that sponsor the Creepy Crate, which also sponsors your Twisted Southern Horror Queen show right here, they're all over it right now, and they love us. And because they're just as twisted as we are, we get an extra $5 off. And I'm telling you, this little box is packed full of stuff. It's like a $50 value as it is, and we're not paying that for it when it comes in the mail every other month. And you guys get another $5 off when you subscribe. I talked about it last week. If you got people like me in your life, you're tired of buying them black hoodies for Christmas, sign up with your Creepy Crate. Get it delivered to that individual every other month for the rest of the year, however long you decide you want to keep the subscription. That's a hell of a Christmas present for a creepy chick like me. Or if you're a cheap bastard, just keep collecting them, and then by Christmas you'll have 6 gifts for 6 different creepy chicks. So I don't know what the problem is. Get your asses over to authorlyngibson.com. Look right there on the homepage, top right-hand corner. There's a little Creepy Crate icon, and it says use the code TWISTED when you check out. You'll get that extra $5 off. That link will also take you to the page where you can read a little bit more about the Creepy Crate, and you can see some of the stuff that has been in some of the past crates. And they're not going to give you any teasers about what's coming up. I know. Trust me, get all over it, folks. You got to get your Creepy Crate subscription. There's my Uncle DW, my Aunt Wanda. They're also joining us from Mississippi. They're over in Pearl River County. Hey, guys, love y'all. Hope everything going well. All right, so it's about that time now. You guys know what you got to do by now. I don't need to tell you. You should be telling me. I can hear you. That's exactly right. It's time to get up and dim the lights, kick the kids out, lock the doors, and go grab a tasty adult beverage, because we're fixing to get our scary on up in here tonight. Let me scroll down real quick. There's Freddie. He's got a link for authorlyngibson.com up there. That's because Freddie's a creepy kid just like me, and he likes hanging out on my website because there's all kind of madness going on out there. Check it out, authorlyngibson.com. Lynn with one N, y'all. I like to keep it simple. All right, so we're going to kick it off on the West Coast tonight. But you guys get the palm trees and the surfboards out of your head right now. That ain't how we roll here. This legend actually starts back off in the day, like way back in the day. In fact, we're going back to 1911. So around 1911, Santa Paula was turning into this booming little metropolis thanks to the oil boom and, of course, the successful citrus crops. And, you know, everybody and their grandmama was packing up their junk and heading out west just to get in on the bottom level of all these booming enterprises, right? Well, the problem was that when the folks actually did get to Santa Paula, if they had money, there was a problem because there wasn't no Hilton back in the day. There wasn't even a Holiday Inn Express. So a lot of the wealthier residents realized that this was a huge opportunity to make some serious cash. And they didn't have to deal with working out in the oil fields or the orange orchards either. These dudes pulled all their money together and they built this high-end hotel directly across from the train depot. Now, face it, no respectable, wealthy person that was rolling into Santa Paula was coming in on the back of a horse. So now all these elite folks were arriving in town and stopping at the train depot, and they unpack all their crap. Well, there's this big, fine-ass hotel right across from the depot, so all they had to do was hoof it across the street, and they could spend some time at the Glenn Tavern Inn. Well, before you know it, this joint was like the happening place. And, of course, it only had the best of the best as the patrons there. So pretty much anybody who was anybody was hanging out there. And the Glen Tavern was catching on in what was happening, and they realized they were the newfound owners of Party Town, USA. So they were throwing some wild-ass parties over there, too. And everything was going really cool. And then, of course, here comes the big bummer, the Prohibition era. Right, so that sucked really bad. So as any enterprising establishment would, they adjusted to accommodate the newest bullshit laws that were passed down by the government. They went underground. Actually, they went to the 3rd floor. And before long, they were hosting the largest speakeasy and brothel and gambling parlor in the entire area. But on the night of March 12th in 1928, a few minutes before midnight, the St. Francis Dam burst. Think about this. 12.4 billion gallons of water rushed through that little area right there. And the wave was actually 100 feet high, 140 feet high. 5 hours and 27 minutes later, after the dam broke, the wave finally swept its way out to sea, 54 miles from where the dam was when it broke. So by the time the water actually reached Santa Paula, it was full of equipment and buildings and material and trees and mud and bodies. The unofficial body count was somewhere around 700, and that's a whole lot of corpses back in the day. So because Glen Tavern was actually on higher ground than most of the other buildings around there, only the 1st floor had damage. Now, the upper floors of the inn were freaking packed with all these homeless survivors and folks that had come into town to start digging through all these corpses to try to find the bodies of their friends and families. That's one hell of a job, right? So imagine all the grief that filled the imprint of this tavern from these people that witnessed it. They've lost their family, and then they're having to go out and dig through all of the corpses to try to find their loved ones. You got to love that. Gavin says he loves visiting my website. Thank you, Gavin. I appreciate that. So this, my friends, is the time period that a lot of the haunted legends pretty much originated. Now, besides the shout-outs and the knifings between all these shootouts, excuse me, and the knifings and the fights and stuff between all these jilted gamblers and cat fights and murdering hookers, and, you know, hookers, they're always hanging around, and they said too much or knew too much or knew exactly what they needed to do to get information out of their clients and other things. Those chicks would usually wind up dead somewhere. So there's a whole other factor that kind of contributed towards all the hauntings that go on in Glenn Tavern. Now, in the 1930s, Hollywood came out there and they sent this scout, and this dude discovered a valley that was right there near Santa Paula that was absolutely perfect for shooting all these old Western films. So, of course, here came all the actors and the producers, and guess where they stayed when they were in town? Yeah, well, folks like Carole Lombard and John Wayne and Houdini and a laundry list of anybody that was on the silver screen back in the day, they all pretty much stayed there at Glenn Tavern Inn. But eventually, the rest of the surrounding areas pretty much caught up, and they all had their own lavish hotels and entertainment venues for the upper crust. And to make matters worse, at that point, all the oil money dried up, and Hollywood pretty much got burnt out on film and westerns. So the train depot pretty much became defunct, and the once little shiny town of Santa Paula was starting to look like a ghost town. Well, Glenn Tavern suffered along with the rest of the town, and with no more of the elite around to rent out all these lavish rooms, the inn slumped down into the status of something worse than your typical flop house. And it continued to spiral into decay until it was purchased and restored in 2004. But in the meanwhile, drunks and hookers and junkies were pretty much the full-time residents, along with some extended stay guests from the hotel's wild and woolly past. So, as I said earlier, most of the crazy paranormal activity goes down on the third floor. And in one room in particular is where they say most of these most of these hauntings are coming from. That would be room 307. Now, there's two distinct ghosts that hang out there, and as far as I know, they didn't really have anything to do with each other, except for the fact that they both booked room 307 when they died, one way or the other. So the first spirit was that of a cowboy that his name was Calvin. And this dude tried to pull a fast one by swindling the owner out of a rather large wad of his cash. Well, the owner wasn't going to let it go down like that. So when the cowboy went up to his room later that night, the owner was sitting there waiting for him. And he shot Calvin in the chest and the head and reclaimed his money real quick, fast, and in a hurry. Well, Calvin died right there in the room. And, of course, he didn't get the memo. Somebody forgot to tell the dude that he was actually dead. So I guess the whole thing probably went down so fast that he didn't realize he'd been shot. Well, these days he shows up there in full form, and he's a tall dude, and he shows up wearing dark pants and a white shirt. Now, sometimes folks will see him walking down the hallway to his room, and sometimes they catch a glimpse of him in the room before he turns away and walks through the nearest wall. Now, he's been photographed there pretty frequently, and I think that's because he was there looking for his hat. Yeah, I didn't tell you about that hat thing, did I? Well, during the remodel that went down in 2004, Calvin's bloody cowboy hat was found behind a wall, and it actually had the bullet hole in it where the owner of the establishment had shot his ass in the head. So the second spirit that you may see hanging out there in that same room doesn't always show up as a full-body manifestation like Calvin the cowboy. She pretty much shows up like this misty figure. And this is the spirit of a hooker that was murdered in that very same room. Her decapitated body was found crammed in the bottom of a closet by a maid after she'd been missing for a couple days. So if you think you see some kind of shadowy mist lurking around in the room, it may actually be her. But you'll know for certain if you notice these cold chills going down your spine and you start hearing these knocking sounds coming from the direction of the closet. And so it's not completely off the wall to also hear her disembodied voices in the room as well. Now, there's another girl that's spotted pretty frequently wandering around the hotel. But this little girl wasn't a hooker. She was actually a very young girl with blonde braids who has a habit of popping up in these occupied rooms. So the guests will usually assume that it's just some lost kid that's wandered in their room. But when they go to talk to her and ask her where mommy and daddy are, she just disappears into the thin air. That will ruin a buzz for you in a freaking heartbeat, folks. So this little girl isn't the only kid that's known to haunt Glenn Tavern. In fact, during the 2004 renovations, again, a group of contractors quit in the middle of their job because they kept seeing this group of kids playing in the hall. And eventually they got tired of hearing them screaming and watching them running back and forth and stuff. So the contractors start telling the kids to get the hell out of there while they're working. And all of the kids just stand up and walk through the walls of the hall that surrounded them. So, yeah, that was pretty much it. Job done. They were finished at that point. Susie said, sweet, been waiting for them. Oh, the books. Yeah, awesome. Derby. She's not in Derby. They are in Carrier, which is not far from Derby, but she actually grew up in Derby. So, and yep, there's the little girl on the 3rd floor. Susie's familiar with Glenn Tavern Inn. That's awesome. So downstairs, there's even a lingering spirit that kind of gets off on sitting at the piano. And from time to time, folks will actually hear him playing that piano. Now, before Glenn Tavern was even a thing, the ground that it was built on was tainted by the blood of a man that had been murdered in the middle of the street. So let me tell you about that madness. So there was this outlaw dude named Joe Dye, and this dude was bad news. This was a bad son of a bitch right here. So he was like one of these crazy bastards that walks around with this deranged look on his face, and everybody in town was pretty much terrified of him. The dude actually had notches on his gun belt for all of his victims as well. So folks knew this dude was not playing around. But the crazy thing was that Joe preferred to strangle his victims, not shoot them. Well, one day Joe lets his crazy slip out, and he just out of nowhere accuses this other guy, Herman Haynes, of having an affair with his wife. Yeah, Joe Dye was married. Imagine that fairy tale union right there, y'all. So anyway, he tracks down old Herman, and just a few yards away from where Glenn Tavern was going to be built a few years later, and he blows him away right there in the middle of the street. Well, begrudgingly, the law does go after him. And even though those guys didn't want to mess with Joe Dye, surprisingly, Joe went peacefully and turned himself in, and he goes to trial. Well, the judge didn't really want no part of Joe Dye neither, and he turns around and says that the whole thing was self-defense and lets him walk. So the rumor has it that old Herman is still hanging out there, and he's pretty much not aware he's dead either, but he's freaking pissed off about what went down. So he has come to start taking out his anger on all the prostitutes that were working in that area. And there were reports way back in the day of this dark man in dark clothing that would stalk these hookers down and bite them or slap them before he just disappeared into the dense night air. So that's some kind of crazy mess right there. Let me scroll down and see who I'm missing. Paula said, Picayune in the house. Yes, indeed, Picayune in the house. Gavin said he would love to hear a ghost play piano. Is that not awesome? Gracie Jordan is in the house as well. Hey, Gracie, there's my girl. So maybe more than a little obvious to all you folks that have watched the show in the past that I kind of dig haunted castles. I think because the majority of them are so old and they go back to some really gruesome and brutal times. So you just know there's all kind of madness going on there. And I especially love the ones that had dungeons that have all the torture tools and goodies like that down there. But this particular castle that I'm fixing to tell you about is a little bit different than the typical castle that we usually discuss. Now, there's not a whole lot of ancient history behind it because I don't really know why, but I will tell you what I did find. This castle was purchased by Gervais de Clifton from the de Rhodes family in the late 1300s. So it's a little bit older than most of these typical castles that were built around the thousands. So we don't really know exactly how old the original structure is, but the locals say it was actually constructed in the 11th century. Now, there's plenty of history on the Clifton family, and of course there would be, because it seems like every single successor has held a position of authority since their history, which runs back about 700 years. Most of these dudes were sheriffs or some other type of law enforcement. Now, that doesn't really put me in the mind of clean cut and wholesome to begin with. Not back in the day, because what we were just talking about, shit was really brutal back then. So I don't really know. I don't know that it's a fact. And, you know, my twisted little mind, I'm thinking that sentences were passed and executions were likely performed on this property. And I guess we may never really know, because there's just nothing of that kind of history that's been recorded that I can find. I'm sure there is somewhere, but I haven't been able to run across it. So the history of the entire state itself is only adamant about a few things during the 700 years that the Cliftons resided there. It seemed that damn near every successor or heir had the entire estate renovated, altered, or added on to. So this goes on until the 1950s, when the last of the heirs decided to sell the property. Then the estate changed hands several times after that, and most of those times it had been converted to some different types of private schools. Now, this is where the bulk of the haunted history comes into play, but there's really not a whole lot to tell there. The first story was about this room where the windows and the doors had been bricked closed. And from within this closed-off rooms, students would often report hearing the sounds of an infant crying. Now, the legend behind that has to do with a jilted lover. It says that the maid, who was also the master's mistress, gave birth to his son while she was living at this estate. And after having been denied the status of any sort by her lover, the distressed new mother snatches up the infant and does a swan dive out of the window of what is now this closed-off room. So she and, of course, the infant didn't survive the impact of the fall, and I guess that left the master of the house with a little bit of splaining to do. Now, besides the jilted lover story, there were mumblings of doppelgangers. Ever hear of those? Those are some badass entities right there, folks. They're evil spirits that take on the appearance of someone else to do wicked things. No, you can't always blame your doppelganger on showing your ass at the bar last Friday night. They know it was you. So anyway, there had been several reports made by students back in the 70s that ran into their own doppelgangers in the halls while they were there attending school. So the reports are there, but they don't really go into a whole lot of detail. Well, this goes on until the grounds once again are sold. And in 2000, the main house was converted into 2 luxury apartments. Well, for one reason or the other, the luxury apartment thing didn't really work out for very long. And in 2007, the estate was purchased by this millionaire named Anwar Rashid. This is where it starts getting good, y'all. Isn't that cool? Most of our ghost legends go way back, but this is very recent. All of this stuff is coming about in the 2000s. So Rashid buys this place and he moves in with his family. Now, his family consists of 4 kids, his wife, his brother, and both of his parents. So it's a good thing that this joint is massive, and it has a shit ton of bedrooms, 17 to be exact, along with 10 bathrooms, a gym, and a private theater. So his noble intentions were soon going to crumble at his feet. And in fact, the very first night there in their new home, there were already signs of what was to come. The first paranormal experience came in the form of a sharp knocking sound by the sound of a man's voice. Now, Rashid called out asking if anybody was there, and of course there was no response. Well, just a second later, the knocking and the man's voice were back. So they couldn't figure out where the hell it was coming from. There was nobody at any of the entrances when they were checked. And in fact, it sounded like it was coming from all around them. So Rashid and his brother go room to room, and they check every window and every door and every closet and under every bed, and there was nobody there that wasn't supposed to be there. At least not anybody that they could see anyway. So things kind of settled down after that, and there was really no noticeable activity for several weeks, but then it began again. Now, one morning, the maid had returned to her quarters before carrying on with her daily chores. She opened the door, and she sees this gray, misty figure of somebody sitting on her bed. The covers and the mattress were dimpled under the weight of this shadowy-looking creature. So as she's standing there in the doorway trying to comprehend what she's freaking seeing, it turns around and it looks at her, and then it disappears, leaving the bed linens all wrinkled where it had been sitting. Needless to say, the maid was just a tad bit on the distraught side after that. Now, only days after everybody settled down from this maid's experience, something new happened. Rashid's wife was on her way downstairs to fix some milk for their newborn. She gets downstairs, she sees her oldest daughter in the den watching TV. Well, it's 5 o'clock in the morning, and she's a little bit concerned over why her daughter was up at that hour, and of course how long she'd been up. But with a hungry and fussy baby in her arms, she pretty much hauled ass to the kitchen to fix his breakfast. So she calls out a couple of times to the den for her daughter to come into the kitchen, but her daughter never answered. So once she gets the bottle fixed and she goes back upstairs, she kind of shrugs the whole thing off that her daughter hadn't answered because, you know, teenagers are moody and all that kind of stuff. So she walks back down to the den, and her daughter's still glued to the TV. So she goes back upstairs and just happens to glance over into her daughter's bedroom. And, you know, the whole moody teenager thing that's downstairs watching TV, not so much. This kid was asleep in her bed. What the hell kind of madness is that, right? So now they're freaking terrified, and these spirits are taking on the form of their kids. What's next, right? Well, I'm going to tell you what's next. All of them start seeing these dark, shadowy figures lurking all around the house. Then comes the sound of this baby crying from behind the wall, which is really freaking them out because they've got a baby there in the house. So I'm betting that one of them kept this kid strapped to him just to make sure nothing was messing with it. Well, it wasn't just the sound of this ghostly infant's crying that they were hearing either. There were the sounds of other people's voices coming from all around, but of course nobody was there. So Rashid goes ahead and calls in this paranormal investigator and his team, and they're hoping that they can help get rid of all these ghosties. Well, the team leader, who was also a police officer, later admitted that out of all the places that they had investigated in the past, Clifton Hall was the one place that actually really scared him. So upon being on the grounds for about an hour, two of these team members encountered the ghost of a little boy, and they immediately fainted. What a bunch of pussies. You don't go into a paranormal investigation and then faint when you see a ghost. What the hell did you expect to see? Anyway, yeah, right. The conclusion of the investigation, they decided that Clifton Hall was one of the most haunted properties that they had ever stepped foot on. There was so much activity in this house that there was no way they could help Rashid and his family. Let me catch up on my comments over here. I'm getting behind. David said he heard a ghost piano play a tune at Old Firetown Church here in Vicksburg. I'd actually like to hear that. Did you get a recording of that? That would be awesome. DW said he loves castles, and Wayla said that's cool. Jesse Holmes has joined. That's Uncle Jesse. He's one of Biggie Johnny Blender's racing buddies. David said, damn. And Mark is also in the house. It says she's not done yet. No, I'm not done. Hey, Joe, good to see you. What's up, Jose? Man, I'm way behind. Sorry, guys. I don't know what's going on with the feed. The puppies, Gavin. The puppies are fine. They have the faces of angels, but I swear they are the spawn of Satan. All right, so back to Rashid's family. So Rashid is kicking himself in the ass by now for dropping all this money on this mansion. He'd been warned the whole time that really weird stuff was going on in that house, but he didn't believe any of that kind of bullshit. He'd heard all those stories of the jilted lover and the doppelgangers, and he actually even heard that the original grounds had been used for some kind of satanic rituals back the 11th and 12th centuries. He even knew about a maze of secret tunnels that were beneath the house and all underneath the grounds there. But he didn't listen. Now he's living this freaking nightmare that he had so arrogantly laughed off when he was warned time and time again. And now he's being told that nobody could help him and his family. This dude was stuck like Chuck. He just dropped 3.6 million pounds on this estate. What the hell is he going to do now, right? Well, everybody had hoped that just the presence of the investigative team would cause the activity to kind of die down. And yeah, those folks must be idiots, right? Because we know here on the Twisted Southern Horror Queen show that ain't how the ghosties roll. They get stirred up and pissed off, and things get worse. So yeah, it got worse for them too. And just days after the team left the grounds, Rashid and his wife went to go check on their 18-month-old son while he was asleep in his nursery. Well, they see drops of blood falling from out of nowhere on the baby and all over his bed. That pretty much did it for them. They walked away from their investment. Rashid told the bank that they could have the bitch back. He would take the loss. So now if you're interested, you can pick this joint up for a steal at about 2.75 million pounds because it's just sitting there on the market waiting for you. Nobody wants to live there. Let's see. Kenny Ryder's in the house. Hey, Kenny, good to see you. Susie said I have the minions. Yeah, I have the minions too. Hey, Jamie, good to see you, little diva. So let's do another castle while we're at it. I was kind of in castle mode when I was doing my research for this show. This one's got some pretty serious ghost legends attached to it, y'all. And I'm going to tell you about the ghosts that haunt Charleville Castle in Ireland. The Charleville Castle is nowhere near the age of most haunted castles, but that doesn't really stop the ghosts from homesteading there. The construction on this improvement started in 1798. It was actually built on the site that was known to host rituals of an ancient Druid cult. By 1812, the castle was complete and it would be the first home to the first Earl of Charleville, Charles William Barry, and his family. Now, one of the first tragic events to mar the castle's history was the untimely death of a little girl named Harriet. Harriet was the 8-year-old daughter of the 3rd Earl of Charleville. So she gets sent upstairs to go clean up after dinner one night. Well, she gets this wild hair up her ass to slide down the banister on her way back downstairs. And this is a massive staircase. It's like 4 stories high. And somewhere about midway down, she lost her grip and she fell to the stone floor beneath. And of course, she died immediately from impact. Now, Harriet is the most seen out of all the castle's ghosts. Folks can hear her laughing and singing sometimes, but sometimes she's heard screaming when she's reliving that fatal fall that she took to her from the stairs. So Harriet is usually described as a fair little girl wearing a blue and white dress with matching ribbons tied in her curly blonde hair. She's usually seen around the stairs, but folks also see her in a room on the top level of the castle. But she's not always alone. Sometimes she's spotted with a little boy. Now, nobody really knows who this little boy could have been or how he could have gotten there, but these days, everybody's pretty much convinced that he's Harriet's little playmate. So there's a pretty cool story about Harriet and her little friend. In 1971, the castle was purchased by this chick named Bridget Vance, and she had intentions on renovating and restoring it back to its original state. Well, one afternoon, Bridget's 5-year-old little boy goes missing, And she and all the workers drop everything and they start running all over the place looking for this kid, because there's a whole lot of restoration work that's going on there at that time. And there's a whole lot of ways that a little kid could get hurt really bad or worse. So everybody's in a panic trying to find this kid. And all of a sudden he pops up at the landing at the bottom of the stairs. The kid's all laughing and cutting up, and he's happy to report that he had just made friends with a little girl and a little boy, and they had just helped him down the stairs seconds before he was found there on the landing. This was only one of the first encounters that was had by the Vance family there. There was this visit from Bridget's mother. Y'all are going to love this. She just really wanted to spend the night in that upstairs bedroom, which actually would have been Harriet's bedroom. Well, she did, but she didn't get a whole lot of sleep that night. She wakes up in the middle of the night during the middle of a druid ritual, opens her eyes, and the room is full of these hooded men in robes, obviously monks. And they'd surrounded her by forming a circle around her, and they were doing some kind of blessing ritual. So she said, anyway, I would be a little bit freaked out if I woke up in a room full of robed and hooded men too. I got to tell you, this creepy chick right here would have went all kind of Norman Bates psycho on them. So anyway, those occurrences were reported by the Vance family. And trust me, there are a ton of other documented occurrences ranging from disembodied footsteps and voices to the sound of chiming clocks in rooms where there aren't any. Oh, and of course, moving furniture. And damn near every room in this castle has a ghost of its very own. Now, downstairs, just a few feet from where Harriet fell to her death, is the library. And legend has it that the Barrys, who first built the castle, were Freemasons, and that was supposedly the place where they held all their mysterious little rituals. Well, during that time, women were not allowed in the library, and today the ghosts that linger around there still have an issue if a woman walks in there. There's been a lot of chicks that have taken the castle tour that have complained about being pushed by unseen hands, or their hair being pulled, or heavy footsteps following them around behind them until they leave the room. Another haunted spot there is the ballroom. Now, nearly every paranormal investigation has gone down in this room. There have been photographs of these unexplained lights that bounce across the bare ceilings there, as well as misty shapes that glide across the floor, as if there's people that are still dancing to some eternal yet unheard orchestra. Let me catch up with my comments. Gavin said, I would like to spend a couple of nights in some haunted castle. You and me both, Gavin. They don't have castles here where I came from, though. Hey, Lee Schilling, glad to see you. David said, absolutely, Gavin, I agree. That would definitely be on my bucket list. That's because you're just as twisted as I am, Gavin, David. Okay, so down at the bottom level of the castle, which is highly avoided by most folks that know better, there's the dungeon. And dungeon, there is this fearsome and sadistic entity that hangs out there, and he does not care for your company at all. The first room that you'll encounter on the lower level is what's known as the Waste Not, Want Not room. And legend has it that the first Earl was a practitioner of Satanism, and within this tiny chamber, some wicked shit went down. So tour guides say that the second you start walking down the stairs, your senses are racked with terror. Torture and death can literally be felt right there in the air. Now, deeper within the dungeon itself, many of the original torture devices can still be found. But the creepiest feature of all there is this altar. This Gothic structure is decorated with stone goblets and skulls, and it was once said to have been hidden behind a concrete wall that was removed during some of these renovations when somebody else got a hold of the estate, decided they were going to remodel. So no doubt this stone structure was used in some ungodly rituals, and perhaps it's what is actually holding this terrifying and sadistic entity that dwells there in the dungeon. There's also another well-known legend there on the grounds of Charleville, and that is the tale of the King Oak. Now, this is a massive tree that's connected to the Berry family. This tree has always warned members of the family when death was coming to visit. Every single time this mammoth oak tree dropped a branch, a member of the Berry family would die. Well, in 1963, the entire tree was struck by lightning. Now, the tree actually did survive the lightning strike, but a few days later, Colonel Charles Howard Berry suddenly and unexplainably dropped dead. He was the last member of the Berry family that owned the castle. All right, so we're going to shift gears one last time tonight, folks. I thought we'd just go all kind of apeshit crazy and we'd talk about one of America's first serial killers. Now, we've talked about this dude before, but I know I've got some new folks watching the show, so I'm going to talk about him again because he is a sadistic bastard, or at least he was back in his day, and I think his story is worth telling. We're talking about H.H. Holmes. So this madness went down in Chicago. Now, this dude was born with the name Herman Mudgett, which kind of sounds like a Looney Tunes character. And I guess he knew that, so he changed his name and he became notorious while he was known as Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. Now, according to a recent profile on Holmes, he was the son of a very violent alcoholic father. And apparently when he went to school, the abuse didn't stop there. His home life had pretty much rendered him antisocial, so everybody at school gave him hell as well. And that included a lot of his instructors and teachers. Well, this one time, one of his professors forced him to stand face to face with a human skeleton in front of the entire class because he'd made the comment that he was terrified of doctors. Yeah, the mold of a sociopath was born, right? So despite all this, he manages to graduate from the University of Michigan in 1884, and get this, the dude graduates as a doctor. So even though he had earned this prestigious title, Holmes already had the reputation and was pretty much known around the community as a swindler. So it wasn't really any big shocker that this dude decided he was going to build an elaborate hotel at the site of the Columbian Exposition for the upcoming World's Fair. Now, from the outside, this building was gorgeous. In fact, on the inside, it was even more elaborate. But there was a whole lot going on there behind the scenes that the average Joe wouldn't really notice when they walked in. Beneath the guise of this fantastic castle-looking establishment was nothing more than an elaborate dungeon designed to capture, torture, and murder his unsuspecting guests. Now, the whole time this joint's being built, Holmes would hire and fire these crews before they finished their jobs, and that was dual purpose. The dude was a cheapskate, so he was stiffing them on their pay, but he was also ensuring that no one person other than himself completely knew the complex layout of this hotel. There were stairs that appeared to lead to nowhere, kind of like somebody say it for me because y'all know I just can't get it out. You know, the rifle people, that house. They just had a movie about it. I don't know why I can't spit that out, but y'all know what I'm talking about. Anyway, besides that, there were doors that opened up to brick walls and doors that could only be opened from the outside. And there were over 100 windowless rooms. Winchester House. I knew I'd come out with it in a minute. And some of these rooms, well, most of these rooms had some pretty elaborate and unusual features. Now, it's true that Holmes built the place to cash in on these massive visiting crowds, but as we all know, there was definitely a hidden agenda going on here. The modern decor of this hotel lured these vacationers into this deadly hotel in freaking droves. The poor, oblivious bastards had no clue of the carefully constructed traps that masqueraded as quiet and comfortable, luxurious rooms. That shit's funny right there. So Holmes actually christened the joint by personally inviting guests and, well, party favors, also known as hookers, But little did they know they were actually his guinea pigs for testing all of these sadistic devices. So other than fulfilling his twisted urges, they were always these financial gains to be had, right? So once he finishes tormenting and murdering and dismembering or burning his victims, of course he made sure to rob them. But sometimes he would actually cut out a few of their internal organs and sell them to a nearby medical school or research laboratory. I know that all sounds chaotic and macabre. Well, the macabre part, that's straight up, right? But chaos, not so much. This sick bastard was crazy as shit, but he was meticulous, and each murder was carefully orchestrated from start to finish. Some of his victims were trapped inside these soundproof vaults or luxury suites, whichever way you want to look at it. And Holmes also had some rooms that had these metal walls that he had painted and trimmed out and decorated with wall art and gas lights, and once you were inside, looked like a normal room. Close the door behind yourself, there was no way to open it and get out. It could only be opened from the outside. So they were pretty much screwed. So as those poor bastards are suffering through the pains of suffocation, Holmes looked on from specially designed peepholes in these metal walls. And as oxygen was inhaled, carbon dioxide, of course, was exhaled, and they suffered with dizziness and panic and fear all while they lay convulsing on the floor. Their last living moments were pretty much consumed with this question of why in the hell they were dying this way. Other victims met their fate locked inside the very rooms that they paid to stay in overnight, thinking they were going to be safe there and resting after spending all day at this fair. Not so much. When they returned to the hotel to crash for the night, Holmes would actually release gas from hidden lines inside the room. So when the guests went to sleep, they never woke up. There were also some rooms that were constructed with iron-covered walls that actually had hidden blowtorches. Yeah, this sick bastard would torch the guests while he stood on the other side of the wall, peeking through those peepholes and watching his victims slowly burn to death. Now, from there, they'd be tossed down a hidden trap door that opened into a makeshift shaft, which of course led to the basement. And in the basement are these two huge incinerators, which pretty much erased all signs of his dirty deeds. At least so he thought. So in 1894, the police investigated a tip from a custodian of the hotel that led to Holmes' arrest. The janitor went to the police and he told them that he was never allowed to clean any of the upper level floors. So a month-long investigation revealed secret passageways and torture chambers, and these atrocities paled in comparison to the mound of human remains like bones and hair that were found in the basement. The walls and the floors and the ceilings were covered in dried blood, and based on the human remains, missing person reports, and testimony of hotel workers who saw Holmes escort women into that hotel that were never seen leaving, it's estimated that this dude killed around 200 people, most of them women, and oftentimes they were blonde. So anyway, Holmes was found guilty of masterminding the horrific events and evil attacks that occurred while inside these hotels' walls. And at that time, it earned the joint the tag of Murder Castle. Now, he was sentenced to death, you think, and he did his damnedest to try to lie his way out of it. But at the end, he actually did admit to 30 murders. Even though we know that there were way more than that, I guess standing in his shoes, he's figuring what difference does it make? He's fixing to be a dead man, too. Well, in response to his atrocities, he was quoted as saying, "I was born with the devil in me. I could not help the fact that I murdered people, no more than a poet can help the inspiration to sing. I was born with evil standing beside me as my sponsor, standing next to the bed where I was ushered into this world, and he has been with me ever since." Holmes was hanged on May 7th, 1896. Now, before that actually went down, Murder Castle was destroyed by several unexplained explosions prior to Holmes' death in an apparent attempt at an insurance scam. His partner, Mrs. Quinnen, confessed to an unawarded policy, and the rest of the castle was demolished at that point. After that, a post office was built on the site in 1938. And guess what? Folks started reporting paranormal activity. Go figure, right? These ghostly apparitions and strange noises, and it even reports that dogs would run all the way across the street to avoid walking in front of the building. Postal workers have reported hearing screams and cries for help. And of course, we all believe that those are the tortured victims of Holmes's victims, or tortured spirits of Holmes's victims. All right, folks, so I'm going to wrap it up for tonight. I appreciate all you guys joining in with me. Let me scroll down one more time, see what I missed. There's Wayla. She's saying it's scary. Trend Killer Syndicate. Imagine if someone come up behind you. Would you be fast enough to react? I'm interested in this show. I liked your page. Thanks for that. I appreciate it. David Childers was on me. He said Winchester. It's old age, David, and you know I am an 80s child, and I left a whole lot of my brain cells back in the day. Gavin said H.H. Holmes reminds me of a killer from Hostel movies, from the different rooms he had. Actually, that's what that was based off of. Was H.H. and all of his madness. David said check out documented about him on Netflix. Yes, Discovery Channel did do a 2-part investigation or research or something on him. Came up with all kind of crazy stuff. It's really cool. Google it, see if you can find it. And Freddie said, thanks for another good show. Thank you, my love. I appreciate it. All right, folks, thanks for hanging out with me tonight. Don't forget, go to authorlyngibson.com. Look into the creepy crate. It's not going to be very long. Actually, I think the next crate ships this week, so you may already be too late. You guys are going to hate yourself for missing out on this, but I will do a live reveal as soon as I have mine in my grubby little hands, and you guys are going to see what you missed out on. So jump on board and make sure you don't miss out on another one. Also, while you're at authorlyngibson.com, pick up a copy of Fury. Yes, you need this in your life. If you're into vampires or erotica or vampire erotica, you really need this in your life. And also go over to the last tab all the way on the right side of the page. Check out The Edge Radio. Right there you can stream us. You can download the app to your Android device absolutely free and carry the hottest rock tunes with you everywhere you go. Torment the hell out of your parents and in-laws. They'll hate it, but you'll love it. All right, folks. In the meanwhile, you guys keep it creepy. Have a safe week, and I will see you back here next week. Same time, same bat station. 7 Central, 8 Eastern. Y'all have a fantastic week.